along with us. He knows a lot about transportation and mass transit and so forth. He is a former NBC News anchor, recipient of the George Foster Peabody Award. He's been a Connecticut resident for over 25 years, served on the Metro-North Commuter Council, and authors a weekly newspaper column, Getting There, which runs in Hearst Daily and other weekly newspapers. He's got a blog, he's got his archive of his blog there, and he's also author of Off the Record, Confessions of a Media Consultant. So we really appreciate him coming here tonight. And please welcome, silently, Jim.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. Appreciate that. And thank you all for turning out this evening. This is a robust crowd from the most beautiful, bucolic, but quietest corner in Connecticut. So I'm flattered that you're all either bored with what's on Netflix tonight or are so anxious to hear whatever it is I have to share with you this evening. So I'm going to share some PowerPoint with you to start with. And as I go through this presentation, if you have any questions, by all means, leave them in the chat box and we can come to them. As Lawrence mentioned, I write a column on transportation issues, which is as much commentary as it is reporting. So I'm going to try and differentiate from what I'm presenting to you as fact and what might be my personal opinion, because I've never been accused of not having a personal opinion in that regard either. So here's what I'd like to cover this evening. I want to talk about where transportation was before COVID, what has certainly happened since, and we're going to be talking about how not only Metro-North, and I can mention Amtrak as well too, but also the buses, the highways have all been adapting to this new normal. What I see is some important dangers ahead and detours around them, because you're so close to what once was the august Danbury branch of Metro-North, which ran all the way up to Pittsfield in its day. I'll mention a couple things about that specifically. And then I want to end by talking about something new on the horizon, which is this Transportation Climate Initiative, which Connecticut has signed on to. And then we'll have time for Q&A. So first of all, how are things going so far before things hit the proverbial lint hit the fan? Up until March, Metro-North was enjoying record ridership, 3.1 million riders a month. They had 97% on-time performance, 2 or 3 trains an hour in rush hour. I'm talking about the main line now, not the branch lines. And even off-peak on the main line, there were 2 trains an hour. More recently, on-time performance has improved. If there's any silver lining in all this, the trains are running on time. They're still trying to run the rush hour service, but they've already cut back off-peak service outside of rush hours to 1 train an hour. Ridership is down 78% from what it once was on weekdays, but ironically, weekend ridership is doing better than weekdays. I don't know where these people are going. If they're going into New York City to do what? I mean, the restaurants are closed. There's the museums may be open. I don't know. They're not seeing their friends, but interesting that the weekend ridership, what the railroad refers to as discretionary riders, are doing better than the weekdays. Here's what it looked like pre-COVID. Maybe some of you moved up to the Salisbury region to escape this. This is the standing room only conditions on rush hour trains pre-COVID. There were people standing in the vestibules who were paying $350, $400 a month for the privilege of standing 90 minutes each way to their jobs in New York City. Plenty of room now. The trains are not completely empty, but they're still running long train sets to make sure that there's room in all these cars for people to spread out. This iconic cover of the New Yorker in March was, brought tears to my eyes because it really replicated what the station looked like. I have not been back into Grand Central since March myself, but people who are there more regularly tell me it looks, pretty much like a ghost town. Not in the old days when parking at the train stations on the main line looked like this. This is 2010 at Fairfield. The town I live in, Darien, still has and has always had about a 5 or 6 year waiting list just for the privilege of paying $350 a year for a parking permit. Not a promise that there'd be a space. They don't even call them permits now. They call them hunting licenses. So if you have a parking permit, that means you could look for a space. They're not guaranteed that there's going to be one there. Those are the old days. This is the new normal. The parking lots at the train stations are empty. And in my town, it's interesting, if there's any glimmer of hope, the town wanted to see if it was worth reissuing next year's parking permits. And they did a poll of all the permit holders. Do you want to have a new permit? Will you pay $350 to have a new permit? 70% of them said yes. Now, that doesn't mean they're all going back to work. I think it means they don't want to wait on that waiting list again for another 5 or 6 years for the privilege of having that hunting license. What's Metro-North been doing? Well, one of the first things they tried to do was to teach people how to wear masks. And it's incredible to me that people are still walking around not wearing masks. This is Darwin in action as far as I'm concerned. They now have a fine in New York City. If you don't wear a mask on a train or a subway, it's $50. In Connecticut, I think it's $100. But they're leaving enforcement of all this to the MTA police, which is virtually non-existent up here. I don't think they've issued more than a handful of tickets to non-mask compliant riders. If you're on a train and you're not wearing a mask, the conductor will hand you a mask. If you refuse to put it on, you still get to ride to your destination. I think that's wrong. I think they should stop the train and escort you off on the next available platform. Because mask wearing is not a political sign. It's a sign of, I'm wearing a mask not just to protect myself from you, but to protect you from me. Because even after we have vaccines, we're still going to be potentially contagious. We may not be sick ourselves, but I think we're all going to be wearing masks for a long, long time. So please, over the face, over the nose, that's the way you do it. I don't know if you've ever seen this guy. This guy is Metro Man. He is the mascot of Metro-North. And I don't know who draws the short straw among the summer interns to put on the Metro Man outfit, but he's been walking around handing out masks. They've been trying all kinds of things on the subway trains to disinfect the trains, including UV light. But on the Metro-North trains, they're still spraying. And I think when all is said and done and we look back on these times, assuming we have been smart enough to survive, we're going to find out that it wasn't the surface contact of viruses that spread the disease. It was the airborne droplets. People are not walking around scraping their fingers on the backs of chairs and putting them in their mouth. But if they're wearing a mask, I think they're going to be safe. Anyhow, I think a lot of this is COVID theater. This is Metro-North going the extra step to make sure that people can feel safe. Was that you, Lawrence, chiming in?
Yeah, apparently other people can see this. It's a little annoying. I don't know. There's a little box. I don't know if you can see it, if it's something on your end that says, please move away from this window or something.
I don't know what that is. I'm going to move this box away from the window.
If it can't be, it's not the end of the world. Just, I didn't know if you could even
Please
see.
move this window away from shared. This thing up here, right?
Yeah, I don't
know what it is.
Okay.
I'm kind of talking around it as best I can.
We will live with it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The railroad is also trying to use technology to clean the air in the cars. This woman with the mask over here is Catherine Rinaldi. She is the president of Metro-North, and I don't know this gentleman's name, but he's demonstrating, this is a big air filter that folds up into the ceiling where that wire goes. And they're experimenting putting ultraviolet treatment in the air filters to kill whatever virus gets sucked into the HVAC system. And that's good. It's on one train so far. One train, I think on the Harlem branch. It doesn't go to Wasaic, I can tell you that. If you ride Metro-North at all, you're probably familiar with what they call the Train Time app, which is where you look up the schedule and you can buy tickets on there. Well, there's some new functionality that's going to be coming to the Train Time app in Westchester, not in Connecticut. There's going to be a new feature that's going to let you know, if you're waiting at a train station, which cars on the train that's coming into the station are the least crowded. so you can get a seat on that car. This was designed by hackers, white hat hackers as they call them, from Stanford University, who took advantage of um, a technology on the trains. When the trains close their doors, and this is true of subway trains as well too, the train takes its own weight. It wants to know how many passengers got on that car, so that when I get to the next station, how much more brake application I have to use. And they took advantage of this technology to say, okay, well, now we know how much each car weighs. Why don't we just tell passengers where the least heavy car is? That means the least passengers. So you're not having to get on a car and walk through a bunch of crowded cars. So 5 minutes before the train arrives at the station, you'll know where to go. And you can spread out, you can avoid the crowding. Yeah, coming soon to the New Haven line, right? Just like Christmas is coming soon. Pre-COVID, this is what Grand Central looked like. I think this is a Danbury train coming in on track 34. This is what it looks like today. A lot more masks, a lot more cleaning going on. And I guess the question is, if the ridership is down so much, with all these changes in residents, work patterns, commutation, what's it mean to transportation in Connecticut? Um, I have a few thoughts on this regard. And the biggest question people are asking now, in New York and in Connecticut, is can we still have twice hourly trains on Metro-North if the ridership is so low? How can public transit possibly absorb these huge deficits even before COVID hit and ridership was at its peak? The railroad was not making money. Something like 20 to 25% of every ticket that you bought on Metro-North was being subsidized by other taxpayers. You're not even paying the full cost of riding that train. So if ridership is down as much as it is, how can we possibly keep paying these deficits? If you're not commuting, you're saving big bucks now. Back in June, they found out that we're driving 37 billion miles less in that month alone, saving $97 billion, like $758 million a day, because we're not paying for car maintenance or gasoline or repairs. And we're also saving, because we're not driving, a whole lot of time. And that's the point. If you're working from home, that convenience is something you're going to not want to give up. The air is also a lot cleaner. Do you remember back in March how clean the air looked? How blue the sky was? We'll come back to this pollution thing and again in a moment. The Pew Research Center, I'm sorry this box won't go away. The Pew Research Center did a survey, and they found out of the people who are working from home now, 20% had already been working from home. 71% were now doing it for the first time, but over half of them said, I don't want to go back to the office. Certainly not 5 days a week. And in some cases, they're going to find out there is no office to go back to. Businesses have been closing offices permanently in Midtown Manhattan. Offices that used to have, or companies that used to have 5 or 10 floors in a skyscraper now have 1 or 2. They want their employees to continue working from home, not only because they're, happier doing it and they're saving money, but they're also more productive. If you're working from home, you're not working 8 hours a day. You're not working 5 days a week. You're working extra. Every day for me is a work day. I've been self-employed for 30 plus years. But so what's a weekend to me, especially these days? Like, I'm going to go to the theater? I don't think so. So I think that we're going to see a lot more people continuing to work from home. However, there are a lot of people who don't have that privilege. They're not knowledge workers. They work with their hands. They use their brains also. But, if I'm an auto mechanic or I'm a healthcare worker, I don't have the option of working from home. I have to be on a bus or a train to get to my office. But there's a big social justice issue that's going to happen around this issue as well, too, from the people who can work from home because they have advanced degrees and those who don't have those degrees and maybe working blue collar jobs. So my prediction, ladies and gentlemen, for the year 2021, this has already been in print and drawn me boos and hisses from the railroad. I don't think commuters are coming back. Certainly not 5 days a week, certainly not in the numbers that we used to have. They don't need to go to work to be able to work. And as I said, in many cases, their bosses have permanently closed expensive offices, saving themselves a lot of money. I have a client in New York City that's saving $3 million a year by not having as much office space in New York. You can buy everybody on your staff a computer and a light and, all the gear that they want, virtual backdrop, and still have money left over after all of that. Telecommuting, the very technology that we're using this evening to do this lecture. And trust me, I love Salisbury, but I don't think I would get in a car and drive up to the Scoville Library to be doing this. I don't think so. But the fact that I can do it remotely and you can be watching it from the comfort of your own home, this technology has made us progress more in 10 months than was expected in 10 years. And there's no going back from that. However, as I said, fewer commuters means larger deficits. And the big question is, how are we going to pay for all this? Plus, the fixation that Connecticut has had recently was what's called TOD, transit-oriented development. Developers investing in offices and condominiums near train stations, especially down here in southwestern Connecticut, Fairfield County. That's the big buzzword. What's going to happen to all those investments when nobody's taking transit? When the whole idea of the transit side of development has lost its luster. The loss projections that the MTA has been sharing with us include $4+ billion in lost fares, $2+ billion in reduced subsidies. A lot of what the MTA gets, this is the parent of Metro-North, the subways, the buses, the Long Island Railroad. A lot of the money they get is from real estate transactions. There's a story today, I believe, in the New York Times that said New York City is collecting $2.5 billion less in real estate taxes. Of course, they're not getting as much toll revenue as they used to as well. Plus, they're spending more money because they have to clean all those subway cars every single night and spray the interiors of those cars. So the alternatives that they're seeing to these increased costs is, if they don't get enough federal help, there's going to be layoffs, service reductions, fare hikes, not one or two of these, but probably all three of them. The doomsday scenario that MTA has been talking about in New York City would certainly affect people in Manhattan and the boroughs more. Wait time would be increased by 8 minutes for subways, 15 minutes for buses. Buses don't run fast enough as it is today, right? The Long Island Railroad and Metro-North would not be able to run one train every hour off peak. It would be one train every 2 hours off peak. Badly needed upgrades to the subway system in New York City, to the signals, would have to be delayed. And they're talking about draconian fare hikes. Even as it is today, I looked this up today because I wasn't sure. I've been to Wassaic, nice little station at the long end of a long train ride. Who commutes from Wassaic to New York? Nobody I know of. Not when you're paying $20 off peak one way, or $536 a month. My God, that's a lot of money. The fares on Metro-North are the highest commuter rail fares in the United States, and they have gone up over 50% in the past 10, 15 years. Bus fares in Connecticut, I don't know if you have any bus service up in Salisbury, but Waterbury, Danbury, some of those communities have CT Transit. Those bus fares have gone up 75%. And remember, the people that take the bus don't have cars, they don't have access to the trains, they have jobs, and if they can't take a bus to get to their job, they're not going to be able to bring home money, and they're going to be on welfare. The Danbury branch. Let's say something nice about the Danbury branch for those of you who have long-term memories. Did you know that the Danbury branch started in 1852 and as recently as 1961 was electrified? The New Haven Railroad pulled out the electric, the copper wire for the cable like some junkie trying to raise money for a score. And it's all push-pull diesel now, and is one of the slowest lines in the world. It only goes as far as Danbury, although it used to go, the Danbury line service used to go as far as Pittsfield until 1971. They did put in a new signal system in 2013, which meant that they can now run more than one train in opposite directions at the same time. It used to be it was only one train running between Danbury and Norwalk at any given time in either direction, but now they can run two so they can meet on a siding. And interestingly, there has been a lot of discussion about another extension of the Danbury line as far as New Milford or maybe back up to Pittsfield. They don't have the money to do that. So what they did was they came up with $400,000 with the Western Council of Governments in a grant to study how to raise more money. They're going to spend, get this, they're spending $400,000 to figure out how to raise millions of dollars. Consultants. Ridership in October, the most recent figures I've been able to find on the Danbury branch, down 85%. None of this expansion stuff is going to happen if the ridership is continuing to be as low as it is. They may just shut down the trains and run buses instead. The MTA's fiscal crisis is projecting $51 billion in capital projects that they would like to do that will probably go on hold. And that includes the LaGuardia Air Train, the subway signal system replacement, as I mentioned, and one project I'd like to show you a couple of pictures from that you might have heard of called East Side Access. They have, for the past 10 plus years, been digging tunnels underneath Park Avenue to bring some Long Island Railroad trains into a new station at the lower level of Grand Central, being built underneath Vanderbilt Avenue. This project was expected to cost $4.3 billion and be finished by 2009. It is now projected to cost over $11 billion and may be finished, if we're lucky, by 2023. So here's a map. This is Manhattan. Here's Grand Central. Here's the Long Island Railroad that usually just goes into a tunnel and then goes underneath the East River to Penn Station. But they built a new tunnel to bring some trains here underneath Park Avenue to this new station that's being dug into the granite underneath Grand Central. The beauty of this is if they can bring some Long Island Railroad trains into Grand Central, they may be able to take some Metro-North trains and run them like Amtrak does into Penn Station. Stay tuned. This is what it looks like. This is about 10 stories underneath street level. These are holes that have been drilled in the Manhattan schist all the way from here. This is near Grand Central, all the way back up to 63rd Street, where they take a right and they go over to Queens. This is what it's going to look like when it's finished. This is the lower level of Grand Central where the food court is now. They're only going to have half a food court because you're going to take this escalator from the lower level down to the lower level. And from the lower level, you're going to go down this long escalator to this station for Long Island Railroad trains. Pretty cool, if it happens in my lifetime. Meanwhile, back on the roads, not to forget our friends on the highways, rush hour traffic is pretty much back to pre-COVID levels. I don't know what it's like up in Salisbury. You have stoplights up there, right? Like red lights? Traffic jams? Nina's shaking her head. No traffic lights. Well, maybe I-84 or certainly 95, Route 7, the traffic's back to what it once was, but that's only for a few hours in rush hour. Partly because some of the people that are going into New York City now, again, from Fairfield County, are driving instead of taking the train because their bosses are paying for their parking to the tune of $75 a day. Nice. However, gasoline tax revenues, because we're not driving as much, are going way down. And it's those gas tax revenues which help subsidize mass transit, pay for the highway repairs. The special transportation fund into which that gas tax money flows, trickles, is going to be in the red in the middle of this year. And when that happens, Connecticut's not going to be able to issue any more bonds for roads or rails. They're currently issuing bonds to pay off the old bonds. Every dollar in deferred engineering or maintenance or construction, every buck we don't spend today will eventually cost us, it's estimated, $4. And my big complaint is that the legislature has been AWOL. They have refused to debate funding alternatives. They are finally back in session after sitting out the past 8 months doing nothing. except complaining about the governor and how he was using emergency powers to try and run the state. Shame on them. Where are they and what are they going to do about these funding alternatives? So let me tell you a little bit more about this STF. The money that goes into it comes from the gasoline tax mostly. And the gasoline tax has not changed since 1997 when it was lowered 14 cents a gallon by the legislature in a highly popular political move, which ended up costing us billions of dollars in money that would have been invested in our roads and our rails in the meantime. Stupid, move. See, I'm not running for higher office. I can say these things. I have no ambitions for anything beyond my current gig. Thank you. There is a gross receipts tax on petroleum, heating oil, propane, license and permit fees when you go to the DMV. Even if you buy a new car, there are more DMV fees. That all goes into the special transportation fund. And if you ever take an Uber or a Lyft, they have those up in Salisbury, I guess, somewhere, maybe. They tack 25 cents on your ride to help subsidize mass transit. And when they don't have enough money in the special transportation fund, they dip into the general fund. And the opposite also happens. They were dipping into the special transportation fund a little too much to balance the budget. And that's been stopped, fortunately. So where does this money go? 40% of all the money in the special transportation fund is paying debt service on bonds that were issued as much as 30 years ago. We are still paying for bonds that we issued after the Mianus River Bridge collapsed on I-95. And we're issuing new bonds to pay off what we can't pay in regular bonds. Yes, we do pay for the DOT operations, snow plowing, repairs, etc. Yes, there are some state pensions in here. I'm not going to get into the state pension debate. That's a whole other discussion. They are what they are. It is what it is. So what are we going to do now? What are the alternatives, I guess? How are we going to refund this special transportation fund with no gas tax coming in and electric cars going up in increased use? You know, I do this talk around the state. I did this talk once in Greenwich, and I said, "How many of you drive electric cars?" And a bunch of hands went up, and I went, "Tesla?" And they went, "Yes." And I pointed at them and I said, "You're paying nothing to drive on our highways. You're not paying any gasoline tax because you're not buying any gasoline. You're a freeloader. You're worse than those people from out of state." So you remember Daniel Malloy, our previous governor, who came up with this, what he called the Let's Go CT 30-year, $100 billion transportation wish list. He wanted all the credit for the idea, but he didn't want his fingerprints on the funding mechanism. So he did what they so often do in Hartford. He created a blue ribbon panel to study what the alternatives were. The governor's transportation finance panel, and they met for weeks. They heard people from all over the country. They talked about all the alternatives, and they came up with a short list of suggestions. They didn't prioritize this. They said it's not any one of these, it's all of these. And the first was put a lockbox on the special transportation fund, stop the legislature from dipping into it like a petty cash box. That happened in 2018. You might have voted on this on the referendum. 82% of people voted in favor of this. So no more money going out that doesn't get spent on transportation. They also said, let's raise the gasoline tax again. Connecticut does not have, despite what people will tell you, the highest gasoline taxes in the world. They're not even the highest in New England. And they were cut, as I said, back in 1997. So let's slowly raise them. Gas is cheap. I mean, I saw gas the other day in Norwalk for like $1.99. Who's going to notice 2 cents gas tax increase? Bring it back up slowly over a few years. Increase the gross receipts tax. Yeah, your propane for your barbecue is going to cost a little bit more as well. They even suggested something that's being done in California and Oregon, and that's what's called a vehicle miles tax. They do this in Europe. You go to the emission station every 2 years to have your pollution devices checked, and they say, "Okay, Nina, I see in the last 2 years you drove 10,000 miles. We're going to send you a bill for that." And Mr. Eddie, I see you only drove 5,000 miles because you take the bus all the time. Good for you. You're going to get a bill for that. That idea was so unpopular that the Democrats in Malloy's own party killed it and said they passed a law saying that the DOT couldn't even study the idea. One of the big things that they were concerned about was, I don't want Big Brother knowing where I'm driving. Well, if you drive with one of these in your car, Google knows where you're going. National Security Agency knows where you're going. We have no privacy left in our lives. They don't care where you went. They just care how many miles and how much wear and tear you did on the highways. Gone. Which leaves us with the least attractive alternative. Yes, the T word, tolls. Tolls, I think, are pretty much dead. The legislature didn't even have the gumption, the cojones to vote yes or no on tolls last spring because it was an election year. And the anti-toll people had done such a good job. I take my hat off to them for grassroots organizing, creating this no tolls CT group that threatened lawmakers. If you vote for tolls, you'll lose at the polls. They were so scared they didn't even have the guts to vote it down or up. So Governor Lamont threw his hands up in the air and said, to hell with this, I'm going to have to come up with some other funding mechanism. But I argue, as this political cartoon shows, aren't we already paying tolls? This jalopy driving on I-84 says, welcome to Connecticut, tolls in effect, blown tire, $200, bent rim, $399, damaged suspension, $2,000. We're paying for driving on these bad highways, but we're paying Midas Muffler and our auto repair shops instead of paying to have the kind of highways that we deserve. One last new wrinkle in all of this, and then I'll promise to have time for Q&A. The transportation, I'm sorry about the box, guys. The Transportation Climate Initiative is an effort to try and improve mass transit and clean up the environment and conduct a little social justice all in one lump sum. The TCI is something that Connecticut has signed on with, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and the District of Columbia. There are a bunch of other states that are still considering it. This has been 11 years in the works, and the legislature still has to approve this for any of it to go through. The idea is they're going to make the utility companies and the oil companies buy permits to sell pollution, in effect. And those auctions and the money that's raised from them will then be spent on improving energy efficiency and mass transit, maybe buying electric buses, maybe encouraging people who drive clunkers that are polluting the air to incentivize them to trade them in and get a Prius or something like that. There's also going to be and the argument is this is going to create jobs and save billions of dollars in healthcare costs. TCI says that 40% of all the air pollution in this state is caused by transportation. And I don't mean electric trains. I mean trucks, buses, cars. And one of the effects of all that air pollution is increased asthma, especially among people of color who live in the inner city. And guess who pays their medical bills? You and me. So by cleaning up the air and not making them sick, that's going to save money on healthcare costs. And that's why they want to have 35% of this money go to environmental justice and equity. And that means this money is not going to be spent in Salisbury as much as it's going to be spent in downtown Waterbury, perhaps. What's it mean to gasoline prices? Well, depending on who you talk to, maybe 5 to 17 cents a gallon more, maybe as much as 32 cents a gallon more by the year 2032. I won't be around then. Good luck with that. But the big question is the legislature going to approve it? And my estimation, not a fat chance. I think they may look at the gasoline tax, but I don't think they're going to embrace this. This is too close to socialism for even the Democrats to wrap their arms around. Anyhow, that's all I'm sorry I've been yattering on as long as I have. I hope you'll check out my column, my blog, the Commuter Action Group, the group that I run. And yes, I have written a new book called Off the Record Confessions of a Media Consultant. And there's a copy on its way to the Scoville Library, and it'll be available on the shelves. That's my donation to you. So happy to answer any questions if you have them. if you've been using the chat box, or I'll let Lawrence play MC for the Q&A.
All right, we don't have anything in the chat box, so I think people can individually, we usually do it in pretty well order in our groups, unmute yourself and ask a question.
By all means. Nobody has a question. There's 33 people here and nobody has a question.
Everyone's
Don't be
just
shy.
stunned.
I got one.
Jeremy.
Go ahead.
All right. Any word on the, or any thoughts on the resumption of weekend train service up to Passaic, especially given that it seems weekends are actually less impacted than weekdays?
Good question. I have not heard anything. I think that if this is something that you're interested in, what I would do would be to reach out to Metro-North. On their website, there's a form you can fill out to give them feedback. I don't know if anybody reads them, but I would also perhaps write a letter to your state rep and your state senator and encourage them to do what they can to encourage Metro-North. I think that you'll find that they will put the trains where the ridership is. And if there is a ridership on the weekends on the Passaic branch, I think they should be resuming that service. But I'm going to make a note of that question, and I'm going to ask my friends. I have some friends in the inside of Metro-North who have to remain nameless, and I'll see if I can get an answer, and I'll shoot it up to Lawrence, and you can share it with you, Jeremy.
That would be awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
There's a question. How is the New Britain Hartford busway doing?
I think, well, okay, let's talk pre-COVID, because none of us doing very well right now. I think pre-COVID, people in Connecticut don't realize how good the bus rapid transit system between New Britain and downtown Hartford was. It was a model that was being visited by transportation officials from around the country. It was a model of efficiency. It was attracting a large ridership. I know there were a lot of complaints about empty buses riding around on the bus system, but I've ridden the bus rapid transit system myself, and I found it to be reliable, clean. They had Wi-Fi on the buses. They don't even have Wi-Fi on Metro-North. So I thought it was a very big success. They've even thought about putting in autonomous buses on that run. In other words, self-driving buses, because it's a fixed route. There's only a few stations, and I think it might be a very easy way to save some money on manpower. So I hope, and again, I think the bus ridership in general is different than the train ridership. These are people who may only have one choice of what to take to get to work. And I think the bus was very popular with them. So let's not be too quick in condemning people who have to ride the bus.
Jim, another question, which sort of relates to what I was going to say, a little more precise. Can you be optimistic about anything post-COVID a few years from now? And I'll just add to it, I mean, without just intuitively looking at some of those numbers you put out there of, reduced income and increased expenditures. How do you see some of this ending up? And obviously no one has a crystal ball.
Well, you're asking two questions which contradict each other. Can I be optimistic, and how is this going to end up? I don't think, I'm not saying that New York City is going to dry up and blow away. I don't think we're going to stop going to New York City. And I think we need mass transit, certainly in this corner of Fairfield County in Connecticut. We need these trains. These trains are vital to the economy of this state. People live in this corner of the state because the trains are there. And if the trains don't run regularly, even if they're not commuting on a regular basis, I don't think they're going to live here. They're going to move up to your part of the world, because if they're not taking the train at all, what do they need to be near a train station for? Am I optimistic in the long run? Yes. I think that we will find a new, like water seeks its own level. I think we'll find that ridership seeks its own level. It may not be 5 days a week. Even pre-COVID, Metro-North found that monthly pass holders, they can ride the train all day long if they want to. They can ride it 7 days a week. They weren't even riding it 5 days a week. They were riding it more like 4 days a week. They were already learning how to work from home. Um, Maybe taking a half day on Friday and working from home. So I don't think that the city's going away. I don't think mass transit's going away. I think that the question is, how do we maintain a service that was losing money even before all of this happened and is losing a lot more money now? Is it fair to ask non-riders, other taxpayers, to subsidize a service that is so infrequently used by a small number of people? And again, I'm not in the legislature. I have no aspiration for higher office. I don't have to answer that question. That's your elected official's job.
There's a few messages in the chat box, but before you go there, a couple of people wanted, I don't know if you want to put up your slide again or just tell people what your website address is, but people were curious.
Thank you. I will put that last slide up again. Go to the bottom of the deck here.
And while you're doing that, and what impact do you see of less train? What impact do you see less trains to Hudson River Valley?
I haven't seen the ridership numbers for the Hudson line, so I'm not sure how they're comparing with the Harlem branch. The advantage of the Hudson line is that Metro-North is offering service that is complemented by Amtrak, and that Amtrak still runs to places like Kingston and Rhinebeck and Poughkeepsie. So I'm not sure. In terms of Amtrak ridership, they're in an equal pickle because so much of their ridership has depended upon business travel. Acela, the so-called high-speed train that they run between Washington and Boston, has had service cut back and his ridership so low that they're offering a 2-for-1 sale now. If you take a train ride now, they'll give you a free ride later in the year. And the fares on Acela are ridiculously expensive. It's almost as much as flying on the shuttle. Those fares have come down as well too. They're doing everything they can to encourage ridership. I would much sooner, if I had to go someplace, take a train than I would get into an airplane right now. But I'm not, as much as I'm a fan of long distance travel, I'm not going to get in a sleeping car compartment and spend 3 days going out to California. I'd love to do that, but not with that air circulation. Thank you very much.
What hope do you see for getaway train service, perhaps to offset some of the commuter loss? There's been talk and efforts in place for years to restore commuter service to the Housatonic Railroad line, which is more accommodating to travelers than going to Wassaic.
So more like tourist trains? I mean, when I hear
getaway question, yeah, I think that's what they're asking.
Getaway trains are usually the early trains they run on holiday weekends and things like that. You're leaving early for Memorial Day, catch a getaway. Tourist trains, yeah. I imagine, are any of you, just kind of like by a show of hands, are any of you like rail fans out there? I generally draw a crowd of rail fans from place to place sometimes. Well, if you're a rail fan or you're at all curious about trains, you know that Japan has great trains, right? And the Japanese not only have the high-speed trains, but they have more tourist trains than anywhere in the world. And the Japanese television network NHK, if you go to the NHK website and look up tourist trains, they have television programs about tourist trains. And even in COVID times, they're trying really hard to run some sort of tourist train service. They're serving fresh sushi on the trains and gyoza and noodles, and they're stopping and taking pictures of people with panda bears. I don't know what. The Housatonic Railroad? Sure, why not? Let's run a train. I'd take it. by all means. But that is quite different than subsidizing billions of dollars in lost fare revenue on Metro-North.
One of my favorite library patrons, which is not a question that you really need to answer, but can you be optimistic about anything post-COVID a few years from now?
Sure. Yes, I can.
Okay.
I can. And I'm normally a pretty optimistic guy. I'm just trying to be realistic in terms of my beat, which is transportation. I can be optimistic. I was doing this talk. I was telling Lawrence, I was doing this talk this morning for a group of senior men in Westport, and they were all abuzz because they're all over 75 and they're getting their vaccine and they're all excited and they like, I made it through the tunnel and I'm going to well, I'm not quite in that demographic, but I'm over 65. So I'm next in line and I'm optimistic about that as well too. But I just don't think we're going to go back to any of the stuff that we used to do unnecessarily if we don't have to. I mean, I don't think people commuted 5 days a week and spent $400 a month and $300 a year for parking and wasted an hour and a half or 2 hours a day on the train because they wanted to. I think because they had to, because they wanted to live someplace nice in Connecticut, but still bring home those fat paychecks from New York. They wanted to raise a family in a nice town with good schools and beaches and golf courses. And if that meant that they had to be on the 5:30 train in the morning going in and the 8 o'clock train coming home at night and seeing their kids on the weekend, God bless them, they would do that for a few years. Now they can sleep in until 6:30 or 7 o'clock in the morning. They can still make that first Zoom call at 8 o'clock. They can play with their kids for an hour and save all that money that they were wasting on riding Metro-North. So I don't think any of us are going to go back to doing things the old-fashioned way if it didn't make sense. I think that this talk itself is a good example. I mean, would you get in your car on a snowy winter's night and drive down to the Scoville Library to hear me? Probably not. Or whoever's coming up next in the rotation that Lawrence has lined up. But we can do this from our home, This ain't exactly must-see TV, but this technology, I think, is something that we're not going to let go of. If Nina Mattias can learn how to use Zoom, come on, there's future for the world. Right, Nina?
Jeremy has another question here, but he may need to clarify, but maybe it means something more to you. Speaking of Wi-Fi, any thoughts on communication infrastructure such as cell service?
Okay. Well, Wi-Fi on the trains is something that's been talked about for a number of years.
Well, I was just going to say, Wi-Fi in Metro-North was a near impossibility given the lack of the cell service that it relies on. So any thoughts on kind of the underlying issue of better communication infrastructure that would support Wi-Fi on trains, but also, being able to make a cell phone call,
Okay, good.
You're outside your house.
You raise a number of issues. Let me just pick up on one word you used there, infrastructure. Biden is about to introduce, I think, $1.9 trillion in pandemic relief, and he's going to have a big infrastructure plan. Infrastructure is more than just rebuilding roads and rails. It's also cell service. It's internet service to the boonies. I don't know how fast your internet is up in Salisbury, but there's a lot of this country that doesn't have high-speed internet. And I'm looking like, an old motion picture film at some jerky rate on some guy's dial-up modem. But the whole idea of cell service is crucial to any hope of ever having Wi-Fi on Metro-North, which I don't think we'll have. I don't think we're going to need Wi-Fi on Metro-North because we're all going to be able to use 5G technology, which Governor Lamont is fast-tracking in Connecticut as a way of encouraging businesses to come here. So we're all going to have small 5G transmitters on our telephone poles outside of our house. That means we'll be able to cut the cord on that expensive cable that you have. You'll be watching all of your favorite television programs on your internet-equipped TV.
All that must-see TV.
Yeah, yeah, all that must-see TV, right? And the fact that you don't have Wi-Fi on Metro-North will be moot. Metro-North got really burned a few years ago when they tried to be an early adopter of technology. When cell phones were first introduced, but not everybody had them, they put cell payphones on the trains. And you would be able to make a call. Honey, I'm coming home. I'll be on the 533. And you pay $1.50 or whatever it was. Well, then suddenly everybody got a cell phone in their pocket, and Metro-North was stuck with these cell payphone booths on their trains, eating up seats. So they're not going to be adopting any technologies anytime soon like that. But I think, yeah, cell technology is going to be essential. And I think there's going to be increased. We all appreciate how much, how important it is to be connected now, right? Any other questions?
Yeah, there's one more up here. Do you see any of the stimulus money from the CARES Act and a new act befitting, I think it says befitting the rail system?
Benefiting the rail system?
Benefiting. Oh, yes, that's what it means. Yes.
I believe in the December pandemic relief package, because I know my daughter just got her check the other day. There was money that went to some of the mass transit agencies. I believe MTA got something like $4 billion. But, that's still putting a Band-Aid on a cancer if that money doesn't keep flowing. And I think that the Biden administration has a lot of fish to fry, and some of them may be bigger than trying to rescue and bail out, big city transit systems going forward. Any other questions? Have we answered all the questions tonight? What's the meaning of life?
Well, I think we answered all the questions that were asked.
Good.
Last chance for questions.
Last call for alcohol, folks.
Well, I guess everyone's thirst is quenched for the moment.
Well, if you have questions, you have my email address. It's right there in the middle of the screen, commuteractiongroup@gmail.com. And I'm happy to continue with this dialogue one-on-one with you as you move forward. And if you're a Twitter fan, follow me on Twitter at CT Rail Commuters. Join my throng of about 5,400 desperate commuters who are looking for something to talk about. And I appreciate the invitation to come up and talk with you this evening, Lawrence.
Well,
and thank you everybody for tuning in too.
Great talk. You've got 4 thank yous there, which is a good number. I don't know if it's statistically accurate, but appreciate your coming here
I'll take it.
Being here and so forth. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Have a great night.
All right. Good night, everyone.